This all started 3 months ago when Isla began complaining about joint pain. At first, I thought it was just growing pains. She's always been small for her age, and I was hoping she was finally hitting a growth spurt. But then the fevers started. Not just normal kid fevers that break after a day or two. These would spike to terrifying heights in the middle of the night, leaving her crying and delirious. After weeks of tests and referrals, we finally got the diagnosis. A rare autoimmune condition that's attacking her organs. The regular treatments aren't working, and her condition is deteriorating faster than anyone expected. There's an experimental treatment available, but our insurance won't cover it because it's still in trials. The cost, $175,000. I've already sold my car, emptied my savings, and taken out loans. I've been sleeping on a fold-out chair in Isla's hospital room because I can't afford both the medical bills and our rent. My ex-wife Naomi hasn't been in the picture since Isla was 2. She decided motherhood wasn't for her, and moved across the country with some guy she met online. She blocked my number when I tried reaching out about helping with the medical bills. Yesterday, I swallowed my pride and went to see my mother, Eleanor. She's always been difficult. Growing up, money was her favorite way to control people. She'd promise to help with college, then withdraw support if your grades slipped below her standards. She'd offer to help with a down payment on a house, then hold it over your head for years. But she's also sitting on a substantial retirement fund, and I was desperate enough to ask. The conversation still makes my blood boil. I explained Isla's condition, showed her the medical reports, even brought a letter from the specialist explaining why this treatment is her best chance. Eleanor just sat there, sipping her tea, examining me over the rim of her cup like I was a disappointing investment that hadn't paid off. "You've always been selfish, Everett," she said, setting down her cup with that precise little clink that always meant trouble. "First, you rushed into marriage with that woman against my advice. Then you insisted on keeping the baby when she left, even though you could barely support yourself. Now you want me to jeopardize my retirement because you can't properly provide for your child." I tried explaining that this wasn't about me being selfish, it was about saving her only grandchild's life. She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "If you had listened to me years ago, you wouldn't be in this situation. I warned you about Naomi. I told you to focus on your career instead of playing house, but you never listened, do you? And now you expect me to bail you out?" That's when my brother Damien walked in. He'd come to drop off some paperwork for our mother, and the look on his face told me he'd heard enough. He tried to intervene, pointing out that this was different from our usual family drama. This was about Isla's life. Eleanor's response: "Don't encourage his irresponsibility, Damien. He needs to learn there are consequences for his choices." I left her house in a daze, but not before noticing something interesting. As Eleanor was lecturing me about responsibility, she was logging into her banking app on her tablet. She's always been careless with her passwords around family, convinced we'd never dare to cross her. I saw it clearly, her retirement account login details, the same combination of our old house number and her favorite horse's name that she's used for everything since the 90s. Last night, as I sat watching Isla's heart monitor beeping steadily, I made a decision. I pulled out my laptop and typed in those familiar numbers and letters. The account balance loaded, $648,000, more than enough to save my daughter's life, with plenty left for Eleanor to live comfortably. My finger is hovering over the transfer button right now. Isla just had another fever spike, and the specialist says we're running out of time to start the treatment. I know this is wrong. I know it's illegal. I know Eleanor could press charges, but as I watch my little girl fighting for every breath, I realize I don't care anymore. I'm going to transfer the money tomorrow morning. I'll deal with the consequences later. Maybe this makes me the selfish son my mother always claimed I was. But if being selfish means keeping my daughter alive, then I guess that's what I'll have to be. Update. It's strange how the biggest moments of your life can feel so mundane when they're happening. Yesterday morning, I sat in the hospital cafeteria with a cup of terrible coffee, logged into my mother's retirement account, and transferred $175,000 to my bank account. No dramatic music. No Hollywood moment. Just the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the faint beep of my daughter's heart monitor down the hall. The money cleared this morning. I immediately paid the hospital and signed all the paperwork for Isla's treatment. They're starting the procedure tomorrow. I should feel guilty, I know. But watching the color return to my daughter's face when I told her she was getting the medicine she needed, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I thought I'd have more time before Eleanor found out. I was wrong. She showed up at the hospital 3 hours ago, still in her tennis clothes, clutching her iPad like a weapon. The look in her eyes wasn't anger, it was something colder. Something I recognized from childhood when she caught one of us breaking her rules. Do you have any idea what you've done? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the waiting room like a slap. I just got a notification about an unauthorized transfer. I thought it was a mistake. I thought surely my own son wouldn't. I led her away from the other families into an empty consultation room. Isla was sleeping and I didn't want her to wake up to this. Alina stood by the window, her tennis bracelet catching the afternoon light as her hands shook. I'll pay you back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Every cent. But Isla needed, this isn't about the money. She whirled around and for a second I saw something crack in her perfect facade. This is about trust. About family, about you proving once again that you're incapable of making responsible decisions. That's when my brother Damien walked in. He's always had this uncanny timing, showing up at the exact moment things are about to explode. He took one look at Alina's face, then at me, and seemed to understand everything. Mom, he said quietly, sit down, we need to talk about this like adults. Adults, Alina laughed, but it wasn't her usual controlled chuckle. He committed a crime, Damien. He stole from his own mother and you want to talk about it like adults. What happened next surprised me. Damien didn't back down like he usually does. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. Before you call the police, he said, let's discuss the Riverside property deal, you know, the one where you forged Dad's signature last year. Alina's face went white. That's different, your father was being unreasonable about selling and the tax returns from 2019, the ones where you claimed charitable donations that never happen. I watched my mother sink into a chair, her tennis outfit suddenly looking like a costume that didn't quite fit. Damien kept going, his voice getting quieter with each revelation. Years of financial manipulation, forged documents, hidden accounts, all meticulously documented on his phone. I'm an accountant, Mom, he said finally. Did you think I wouldn't notice? The silence that followed felt heavy enough to touch. Alina stared at her perfectly manicured hands, then at the hospital corridor visible through the window where Illa's room was. How much, she asked finally. $175,000, I said, exactly what the treatment costs, not a penny more. She nodded almost imperceptibly. And it will work. The specialists say she has an 85% chance of full recovery with this treatment. Without it, I couldn't finish the sentence. Alina stood up, straightening her tennis skirt with those precise movements she always uses when she's trying to regain control. I'm calling my attorney. Not to press charges, she added quickly, seeing my expression, to draw up a formal loan agreement with interest and conditions. Mom, Damien started, but she cut him off. I'm not doing this out of kindness, she said, her voice sharp. I'm doing this because I won't have my family's dirty laundry aired in court. The money will be treated as a loan. You'll pay it back, Everett, every cent, and we will never speak of how this loan came to be. Understood, I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Tell Illa. She hesitated, her hand tightening on the doorframe. Tell her grandma hopes she feels better soon. After she left, Damien and I sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he pulled out his laptop. We should get that loan agreement drafted before her lawyer does, he said, starting to type. And Everett, next time you need help, try asking your brother first. I've been keeping records of Mom's financial games for years, waiting for the right moment to use them. I looked at him, this brother who I always thought was too busy with his own life to care about mine. Why didn't you ever say anything? He shrugged, still typing. Some weapons you save for when they're really needed. Now let's talk about payment terms that won't bankrupt you. As I write this, Illa is sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. The treatment starts tomorrow morning. Alina hasn't called back, but her lawyer has. And Damien is still here, working on turning my theft into a legitimate loan. I know this isn't over. The money still has to be paid back. Alina's silence feels more like a gathering storm than actual peace. But right now, watching my daughter's chest rise and fall without pain, I can handle whatever comes next. Update 2. I thought we had an understanding after our last conversation. I was wrong. The police showed up at the hospital this morning, right as Illa was finishing her second treatment session. 2 officers standing awkwardly by her bed while she clutched her stuffed giraffe, asking if I could come down to the station to answer a few questions. Alina had pressed charges not just for the unauthorized transfer, but for a pattern of financial exploitation. She claimed I'd been stealing from her for years, manipulating her into giving me money, taking advantage of her declining mental state. The officers had a stack of documentation, bank statements, emails, texts, all carefully curated to paint a picture of a predatory son bleeding his elderly mother dry. Damien was livid when I called him. She's trying to get ahead of her own legal problems, he said, his voice tight with anger. If she can establish herself as a victim of financial abuse, it makes her look more sympathetic when her irregularities come to light. I spent 6 hours at the station, 6 hours of explaining why I accessed my mother's account, why I needed the money, showing them Illa's medical records, trying to make them understand. The detective handling the case kept looking at his phone, seemingly more interested in his text messages than my explanation, until he got one particular message that made him sit up straight. "Excuse me," he said, leaving the room. When he came back 15 minutes later, something had changed. He was looking at me differently, with a mix of curiosity and what might have been respect. "Mr. Anderson," he said, using my father's surname that I haven't heard in years, "we've received some interesting information about your mother's finances. Would you be willing to make a statement about the Riverside property sale?" I didn't understand at first. Then it clicked. Damien hadn't been idle during those 6 hours. He had sent everything. Every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence he'd collected over the years, including, as it turned out, proof that Alina had been evading taxes through a complex scheme of fake charitable donations and property transfers. The next few hours were a blur. My father Elias showed up, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He'd been called in to verify signatures on various documents, signatures that, according to him, he'd never made. The look on his face when he saw the forged papers. "I'd never seen my father cry before today. She told me I'd signed them while I was tired," he said quietly, staring at a property deed from 2019. "I thought maybe I just didn't remember. She's always handled the finances, always said I wasn't good with money. But these, I never signed these." The investigation shifted focus so fast it gave me whiplash. Suddenly, I wasn't the primary suspect anymore. I was a witness. The detective started asking different questions. About Alina's financial control over the family, about patterns of manipulation, about her history of using money as a weapon. Damien arrived with his laptop and external hard drives, years of meticulous records laid out in spreadsheets and folders. "I started keeping track after the college fund incident," he explained to the detective, "when she pulled my tuition 2 weeks before finals because I got a B in calculus. I realized then that someone needed to watch her. Meanwhile, Isla's treatment was working. Her fever broke for the first time in months. The specialist said her numbers were improving faster than expected. She asked about Alina today, the first time she's mentioned her grandmother since all this started. "Is Grandma mad at us?" she asked, her voice small. "She always brings me candy when I'm sick, but she hasn't visited." Before I could answer, a nurse came in with surprising news. Alina was in the hospital lobby asking to see Isla. I found her sitting there looking smaller somehow, her designer handbag clutched tight against her chest. "The police called," she said when she saw me. "They want to look at all my accounts. They're saying terrible things, things Damien is telling them about me." "They're not things Damien is telling them," I corrected her. "They're things you did, things you've been doing for years," she flinched. "I was protecting this family. Everything I did, every decision I made was to keep us secure, to make sure we had enough." "No," said a quiet voice behind us. My father was standing there, looking at Alina like he was seeing her for the first time. "You did it for control, and I let you." "We all let you." Alina started to speak, but he held up his hand. "I've spent the afternoon talking to the police about the Riverside property, about the vacation house in Maine, about all of it. It's over." Alina, she seemed to collapse in on herself right there in the plastic hospital chair. "I'll be arrested," she whispered. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe we can figure something out, return the money you've hidden, make it right. But first, there's a little girl upstairs who's asking for her grandmother. She doesn't know about any of this, she just knows she's sick and her grandma brings her candy when she's sick." Alina looked up at me, then at my father, then down at her expensive handbag. Slowly, she opened it and pulled out a small package of gummy bears, Isla's favorite. "I don't know how to fix this," she said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but maybe we can start with those gummy bears." As I write this, Alina is upstairs with Isla, reading her a story while my father watches from the doorway. Damien is still at the police station, going through records. The detective called. They're willing to work out a deal, considering Alina's age and status, but there will be consequences. I don't know what happens next. The investigation is ongoing. Isla has 4 more treatments to go, but watching my mother hold my daughter's hand, her voice shaking slightly as she reads about a hungry caterpillar, I realize something. Final update. It's been 3 weeks. Isla finished her last treatment yesterday. She's in remission. But that's not why I'm writing. Last night, I found something in Alina's study that changes everything. Damien called me over to help clean out her house after the tax fraud investigation. She avoided jail but lost everything, now under house arrest with my aunt. "You need to see this," he said, holding up a key taped behind an old family photo. A safety deposit box key. Inside, documents that made my blood run cold, investment records, shell companies, and a letter from our grandfather dated a week before he died. The money Alina controlled, the wealth she used to manipulate us for years, was never hers. It was a trust fund meant for all the grandchildren. Millions that should have been ours at 25. And then the worst discovery, a folder on Naomi. Alina hadn't just tracked my ex-wife, she sabotaged her. Ruined job opportunities, blocked rental applications, wrecked her credit. She made sure Naomi could never come back for Isla, forcing me to rely on her instead. I found Naomi's address. She's been in Arizona, barely scraping by. She had no idea why everything kept falling apart. I thought I was going crazy, she whispered when I called. Every time I got close, something would happen. I was too ashamed to tell you. The second call was to Alina's lawyer. He confirmed it. Alina used loopholes and forged documents to steal control of the trust. But here's my revenge. I'm not pressing charges. I'm not sending her to jail. I'm doing something better. She'll get just enough to live modestly. The same amount she always claimed was more than enough for everyone else. The rest goes where it belongs, to the grandchildren, including Isla. And next week, Naomi is coming to visit. Alina doesn't know yet. She'll show up for her weekly visit with Isla, expecting the usual power play. Instead, she'll find Naomi sitting there. Naomi, who now knows everything. Naomi, who will finally share custody of her daughter. And Alina will have to sit there every week, watching the family she tried to control come together without her at the center. She'll have to smile through it, knowing her own choices led to this. Isla's too young to understand, but she senses the shift. Everyone seems happier now, she told me, hugging the teddy bear Alina brought her last week. Even Grandma, even though she looks sad sometimes. The trust fund will secure Isla's future. Naomi will get the stability she was robbed of. Damien's kids will have their college paid for. And Alina, she'll live comfortably, but modestly, just like she always preached. Next month is Isla's birthday. Everyone will be there: Damien, my father, Naomi, even Alina. She'll have to sit there and watch as her web of control unravels into something she never wanted. A real family, happy whole, without her pulling the strings. That's a kind of justice I can live with.